A midwinter sun hangs low in Siberia. Days are short, winters long. The Kremlin used to send its enemies here to grim gulags. But that Siberia of wooden huts is frozen in time, a museum artifact. Today, modern Siberia is anything but. Khanty-Mansiysk is the city oil-built. Riches here raise golden spires and futuristic shrines, like Russia's chess academy. A 3-hour flight from Moscow. This is the Calgary of Russia, smaller, but even more dependent on a petro economy and state-owned companies like Gazprom and Rosneft, which fill the Kremlin's coffers. But with the slippery slide in oil prices, Russia is facing an oil squeeze, a slowdown just beginning to show. Winter is Viktor Fedosenko's golden time. Normally, he's out in the taiga drilling the top layer of frozen ground in preparation for the deeper oil drills.
Обычно вот в это время, вот февраль.
Usually at this time of year, both my machines are out. My yard is empty, and on top of it, there's a queue for more work. But right now, one of my machines is sitting here completely covered in snow. It hasn't gone out once this winter.
Tenders for drill work have been delayed or just not offered. Oil companies are cautious, trying to cut costs and develop strategies for the lower oil price. So when you see this out here idle, must worry you.
Безусловно, я переживаю, но дело в том, что...
Of course I'm worried. We'll survive somehow, but we'll have to keep a close eye on how things develop further.
Siberia's oil treasures were first tapped in the 1970s and 80s. Russia is still the third largest producer, behind the US and Saudi Arabia. So we're traveling along here in Western Siberia between the Ural Mountains and the Central Siberian Plateau. That's where some of the world's richest reserves of oil lie. It's a pretty unforgiving climate, though. 7 months of winter a year, but the rewards are worth it. But the easy oil's getting scarcer. Costs are rising, and Western sanctions against some of Russia's largest energy companies are biting. And not only Russian operators. There are only a few Canadian companies working in Western Siberia, but one of them is Trican, based out of Calgary. We discovered them here on the highway having a mechanical problem. The driver is nervous to speak with us. Work has slowed since September, and he's got a truck to fix. Now you have a plant just up here, right?
Yes.
Trican executives in Moscow and in Calgary were unwilling to speak with us. The stock price has plummeted 70% since the summer. In Moscow, Canada is especially unpopular after it extended sanctions last week to Rosneft, Russia's largest oil company. It owns a 30% stake in an Alberta tight oil project. Mikhail Leontiev calls the sanctions ridiculous.
There's a lot of hysteria around Russia, so Canada had no choice but to take action. At the root of this hysteria, it's the Ukrainian lobby groups in Canada.
But in Moscow's financial center, there are storm clouds gathering, a bearish sentiment. Analyst Ildar Davletchin says the low ruble is insulating some of the energy companies currently, but not forever.
It's kind of maybe even a perfect storm, I would say, that things can get worse later on.
Roughly half of Russia's budget revenues come from oil and gas. The Kremlin is now cutting spending, except on the military.
The biggest loser in the current environment is the Russian budget, and with 50% lower oil price, that's in dollar terms, the revenue has also halved. On the one hand, you feel depressed sometimes that, okay, things are just getting worse and worse and you cannot understand, and so that's it. But at the same time, well, let's not write off Russia completely, and Russia has this tendency to surprise just at a time just when everyone thinks it's over.
Back in the vast Siberian tundra, there's been little incentive to diversify. The higher oil prices rose, the more money for Moscow. Even with aging technology and scarcer conventional oil, people prospered and the Russian state got wealthy. These donkeys are like a drug for Russia, pumping riches into the state reserves for decades. A few months ago, the Russian Prime Minister said Russia needed to get off the oil needle. Problem is, it hasn't for 20 years, and President Putin has used the reserves as a political lever, so that now Russia remains an oil addict. If Khanty-Mansiysk is Calgary's cousin, Surgut is Fort McMurray. 3 times the size. 1 out of every 3 people work directly in oil and gas, and the other 2 support it. High-rise apartments sprung up to feed a hungry energy sector. Back in the 70s, Surgut attracted prospectors looking to make their fortunes. Like Vladimir Samborsky, a businessman and real estate owner. He grew up in Western Ukraine, part of the Soviet Union, but as a younger man, he was lured to Surgut.
It was 45 years ago. I was young. I was romantic. I want to have auto, car, Moskvich, but it was very expensive. Here, pay money monthly more than Ukraine. I lived in
He did well,
Western Ukraine.
but in the last year, he says the system's broken down. Already, his tenants are asking for breaks on their rent. It will be worse. Worse coming?
I think yes.
Politics, the petro price, and the war in Ukraine is hurting business.
Situation is so serious, so strong, so impossible for understanding. It is not. I understand Quebec and Canada. I understand Scotland and England. I understand Western Samoa and Eastern Samoa. I understand Pakistan and India. I understand Tibet and China, but I don't understand Ukraine against Russia or Russia against Ukraine. Understand me? It's impossible.
You won't hear that or anything very negative from those who stand to lose, the oil patch workers, bussed back home under the watchful eye of Surgutnefgas, a privately owned oil company with its headquarters across the street. Tightly controlled and not keen on visitors, our producer translates their fears.
They're worried, but don't film us. We're going to lose our jobs. They're worried. Мы из Канады. Да, из Канады приехали в Сибирь.
Only one man stopped briefly to tell us they are worried. They're being told to watch spending and cut expenses. But he warns us.
Make sure, wherever this is shown, there isn't anything negative against our government or our people.
Tied so tightly to the ups and downs of oil and gas, Russia's flame will be less bright. The fallout is already fueling resentment.
Санкционная политика, которая введена главным образом.
The sanctions, they only hurt the common people.
Всех этих санкций и из того ситуация.
I don't feel any hate or anger against my own government, but the more pressure there is on Russia, the more I will suffer, and the more upset I am against the West.
What do you think will happen, Victor, if the price of oil stays low for a period of a couple of years? What happens to the business around here?
Мое предположение, что если оно упадет ниже,
If it goes lower than $40, I think everything will just stop dead. And the question is, how will we ever survive this?
That's a question both Russians and Canadians are posing. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Khanty-Mansiysk, Siberia.